Hello everyone, this is the build that I was originally planning on playing this season, but ended up becoming my runner-up. This is Incinerate Totems Chieftain. It's incredibly tanky, has solid DPS, and I think the Totem playstyle is going to be very powerful in the Forbidden Sanctum League mechanic. You could also do this on Hierophant and it would work similarly. The reason I planned on Chieftain was I wanted to eventually use the Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh jewels to get the Juggernaut Unbreakable passive, which is what really pushes the defenses over the edge. This isn't a full guide, but I think it's a solid build, so I will share the POB in case you're interested, and we'll just talk about how the build is going to work. So with that said, let's talk about the POB. So this is the path of building. We're going to focus on life regen, and later on armor for the unbreakable nodes that we'll get from Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh. It might take a while to get those because they tend to be very expensive. We're going to use Righteous Fire to buff our spell damage and help with our clear. We're only going to spec Ancestral Bond for like difficult bosses, like Pinnacle bosses. Otherwise, remove it, don't use it, so that you can clear with Righteous Fire and Infernal Cry. Infernal Cry covers enemies in Ash, and it generates endurance charges for us because of the Chieftain notable Valaco. We could use Hinekora to cover enemies in Ash, but it's not really worth it because we can just get it from Infernal Cry anyway, and we don't really need the other modifiers from Hinekora. We also don't really need the endurance charges, especially once we get Unbreakable. So we're going to convert those endurance charges into brutal charges using Arn's Anguish, which is a belt that drops from the Maven. And brutal charges give you a 3% chance to deal triple damage per brutal charge. You can pretty easily get up to 5 of these, and that's a 15% chance to deal triple damage. Arn's Anguish is also actually just a pretty decent belt. It has good life, resistance, and armor on it. We're going to use a few cluster jewels because one, the totem wheels, the natural totem wheels on the tree are not very good, and the totem wheels that you can get from cluster jewels are very good. We can get free Onslaught and free Arcane Surge just from cluster jewels. We have some slightly inefficient pathing up here through these 2 intelligence nodes when we could have just gone through here. This is just because we need more intelligence on the build. We don't have enough unless we go this way. And this only wastes 1 point anyway. If you can find a better way to get intelligence on the build, then by all means go for it. And we are using Aegis Aurora combined with Glancing Blows, and this makes us basically immortal to getting shotgunned. Even with Righteous Fire melting our energy shield constantly, it just still makes us like immune to sustaining lots of small hits. We're using Soul Mantle obviously because it's a free 7-link for a totem build. And then we're using 2 Kikazarus because these will negate the curse drawback on Soul Mantle. And also, after the buffed Kikazaru last patch, these give a ton of life regen, which helps a lot with Righteous Fire. We're also, of course, using Self-Flagellation because it's an enormous DPS boost when you're using Soul Mantle. For the amulet, Ashes of the Stars is the best amulet for basically any caster build. But before then, you could use an All's Uprising if you can find a cheap one. Usually something like Anger is not very expensive, or you could just use a +1 to fire skills rare amulet, or even something really simple like the Anvil or Astromentis. My plan if I were to league start this would be to get the Anvil early on, and then move into something more expensive like a +1 fire skills amulet. Also, while you're leveling, just use Holy Flame Totem because you can't get Incinerate until Act 6 or Act 3 if you do the library. So until then, just use Holy Flame Totem. It is a pretty solid leveling skill, and it functions pretty similarly actually to the way Incinerate Totems work. Also, if you're interested in a bit of a change-up, you can use Flameblast instead of Incinerate. The gem setup is basically exactly the same for Flameblast for the optimal gems. I don't really like this just because the playstyle of Flameblast is pretty spiky. It's pretty dangerous until the Flameblasts actually go off and kill the enemies around you. Incinerate, in my opinion, is basically built for totems because the way it works is you channel for up to 8 stages, and then once you've reached 8 stages, you can release it for a big burst of damage. Totems, however, will always release perfectly timed when they reach 8 stages, which is something that you won't be able to easily do consistently if you were manually timing it. And then the totem will automatically just start channeling the next wave of Incinerate. So the last thing to talk about is that calculating Incinerate DPS is a little bit weird because POB only shows the stages individually rather than averaging them out, which is what you actually need to do to figure out your DPS. So I've already done this for you in the notes. What you need to do is you need to add the average hit of each stage. So for stage 1, you would add 60,496, plus stage 2, 72,521, and so on. And then all the way up to the release, which happens at stage 8. That's 870,000. And this is just based on the gear and the tree that are in the build. Your numbers could be a little bit different, but this is how you would calculate the DPS. And then you would divide that by 9 because there's 9 numbers, 8 stages plus the release. And then you multiply that by your cast speed, which is 5.6 in this example. And then you would multiply that by your number of totems. So either 3 totems if you're mapping, or 4 totems if you are bossing and you've taken Ancestral Bond for the extra totem. Anyway, that is this Incinerate Chieftain build. I think it is a pretty strong build. I am still kind of leaning towards maybe league starting it, but the planned league starter that I have now I think is just going to be a little bit more fun. Anyway, if you decide to try this out, let me know. But like I said, this is not really a full guide, so I'm not really recommending it in particular, but I do think it's pretty strong. Whatever you decide to go with on your league start, good luck in the Forbidden Sanctum.